As a base case, I would expect higher. I'd say next 18 months or so. It's hard to time things precisely. Um, we are generally seeing as the Fed starts to cut interest rates, we're seeing a softer dollar.
Lyn Alden is renowned for her in-depth and perceptive analysis of the macro environment, which includes the foundations of Bitcoin and related topics as a feasible currency. Advocate Lyn is quite bullish about gold and Bitcoin, but she rarely predicts prices. She has often referred to the most popular cryptocurrency as the hardest money in the world. Lyn said she thinks the price of Bitcoin will keep rising until it reaches hundreds of thousands of dollars in a recent interview with Altcoin Daily. LynOps provides an extremely optimistic 1 million price estimate for Bitcoin in the next years, when asked if she agrees with Cathie Wood's $1 million prediction for the cryptocurrency by 2013. The existing global fiat-based monetary system is doomed, according to Lyn, and is about to enter some extremely unpredictable and chaotic times. Consequently, Lyn says she has a slightly longer time horizon than the CEO of ARK Invest, but she is certain that Bitcoin will reach $1 million per coin at some point. According to Lyn's interview with Altcoin Daily, investors such as nation-states, sovereign wealth funds, big hedge funds, and multi-million-dollar corporations will start hoarding hard assets like gold and Bitcoin in the next 10 years as a way to avoid the unavoidable and ongoing devaluation of fiat currencies. Lyn demonstrates that macro indicators, such as changes in global liquidity, have a bigger influence on Bitcoin prices than core fundamentals such as the 4-year herring event, since central banks, led by the U.S. Federal Reserve, are abruptly loosening their stringent quantitative tightening policies. Since Lyn thinks that the price of Bitcoin will soar in 2025, we'll play excerpts of her talk.
Sure. I mean, I found it multiple times. Basically, it kind of takes multiple touches with it usually. I knew someone that was mining it on her like gaming computer back when you could just do that. And I thought, oh, that's neat. I maybe I should do that because I had I had a decent graphics card and I was like, maybe I should do that. I never got around to it. Then a few years later, it had another one of those like bull runs, and I was like, maybe I should buy a little bit of it. I looked at the exchange at the time, and they were like really sketchy looking. And I was
What
like,
year?
that second one would have been in 2013, 2014, 2015, something like that. And I was looking at the exchanges and they were really sketchy looking. And I was like, I gotta like put more time into this to make sure I don't get scammed. And again, I just didn't. Like I just, I had life going on and I just kind of didn't get back to it. When it had the big bull run in 2017, I had a couple interactions with it. One was I was I was an engineer at the time still, uh, basically running technical procurement for an engineering facility, and suddenly graphics cards doubled. And I was like, why? Like, why are graphics cards doubling? And one of our engineers was like, oh, that's Ethereum. And I was like, so what? Like, what's Ethereum? And then I did this whole research thing. Okay, what's going on with Ethereum? What's going on with Bitcoin? I wrote my first public piece about the space in November of 2017. And I said basically that the tech was very interesting, but that I thought that it was rather euphoric at the time. And of course, over the next month, like it soared into the top and then had this prolonged bear market. What I tried to do this time though was not forget about it. All those prior times, I would kind of see it and think it's cool and then kind of just forget about it. But after this was like the third time of doing that, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to make the same mistake. So during the bear market, I kept following it. And then that's, especially during the COVID crash, like that March 2023 sell-off, when it started to come out of that is when I bought in pretty heavily. And I've been bullish ever since.
Leading analysts and investors who spoke at a conference on Wednesday had differing opinions about the Fed's rate decrease announcement. I think the Fed is making a colossal mistake cutting rates at a time when the U.S. government is printing and spending as much money as they ever had in peacetime, and I think a lot of people are looking forward to a rate cut, meaning that they think the stock market and other things are going to pump. Up the jam, said former Bitwise CEO Arthur Hayes, who harshly criticized the Fed for considering a rate cut despite the increase in dollar issuance and out-of-control government spending. A few days following the Fed's rate cut, I believe the markets will plummet. Lyn concurs that, despite being widely anticipated, the central bank's pivot is not now the best course of action for the U.S. economy. This is in contrast to the Fed's largely dovish comments on Wednesday. In order to slow down the impending fiscal dominance train, which Lyn claims poses a threat to the entire global financial system, the U.S. government should consider implementing an austerity program. She also discusses the stock market, pointing out that only a few companies are carrying the top indices, which suggests that the economy is not robust. Let's return to the conversation.
I have some public portfolios, and I keep it pretty manageable there. Like I'll do a 5% allocation, and then during a bull run, as it grows into like a double digit allocation, I'll kind of like rebalance it back down. Um, because a lot of people just kind of follow that portfolio, and so I just by default, it's kind of like the benchmark is a fairly stable portfolio, just spiced up a little bit. For my own allocation, it's double digit percentage. It's a rather large allocation. Part of that is because I bought in with conviction, but then also just because it's outperformed most other assets since I've owned it. And therefore it appreciated to become a rather large position. So a lot of my position is just from not selling. But then in addition, because I'm a general partner at Ego Death Capital, we invest in Bitcoin related startups. So I also have venture exposure that is kind of indirectly tied to Bitcoin as well. So I put less emphasis on that than others. I mean, obviously over time, the halvings are important because the new supply coming to market is relevant. So as that goes down, that is relevant. But I generally view global liquidity as being more impactful. I've done analysis. Actually, I have a report coming out with a colleague, and we did analysis of liquidity correlations. Bitcoin versus global liquidity, and then also other assets compared to global liquidity. And it does turn out that in any given 12-month rolling period, Bitcoin is more correlated with global liquidity than any other of the major assets that we do. So stocks, bonds, gold, foreign stocks, things like that. They're not, many of them are just to varying degrees correlated with liquidity, especially stocks. But Bitcoin is the most correlated with liquidity. And most of those highs and lows are associated with liquidity rising and falling. And the two major components of liquidity, the way I measure it, one is basically the rate of global credit creation. And then the other factor would be the strength of the dollar relative to other currencies, which is relevant for what we talked about earlier, which is that a lot of countries in the world have dollar-denominated debts. That's kind of the unit of account for a big part of international finance. And so whenever the dollar is strengthening, that's actually putting a lot of pressure on global liquidity. Whereas when the dollar is weakening compared to other major currencies, that's actually pretty positive for liquidity. So I think a lot of the correlations that people associate with the 4-year cycle are actually liquidity, which kind of is overlapping with it. Even though I do think that there also is some relevance from the halving. As a base case, I would expect higher. I'd say next 18 months or so. It's hard to time things precisely. Um, we are generally seeing as the Fed starts to cut interest rates, we're seeing a softer dollar. It doesn't mean it's going to be a straight line, but basically some like the catalysts that kind of really propped up the dollar are kind of fading. And the dollar, the United States runs a structural trade deficit, which for most currencies would be very weakening for their currency over time. But the United States is also the global reserve currency, so we have all those dollar-denominated debts around the world, and all of that represents inflexible demand for dollars. So there's this balancing point. Whenever we tighten monetary policy, we actually are pretty capable of strengthening the dollar. Whenever we loosen monetary policy, that tends to be pretty dovish for the dollar. And so because I expect a somewhat weaker dollar and I expect probably going back to more global credit creation by next year, probably the year after that, I think we're entering another upward liquidity cycle after really like 2+ years of kind of being range bound in liquidity. So Bitcoin has followed this liquidity cycle pretty closely. And my base case over the next 18 months is probably for both liquidity and Bitcoin to go up. Although I don't really have a view of, say, the next 3 to 6 months. I mean, these are processes that take time to play out.
It remains to be seen if the Fed's change will ultimately be harmful or beneficial for the markets and the world economy as a whole. But since the Fed's announcement, the price of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency assets has increased significantly. With the top cryptocurrency currently trading above $63,000 per coin. A 10% rise in the top cryptocurrencies during the last week as major central banks announce more rate cuts and fully resuming quantitative easing. Solana and Avalanche are also showing some promise, rising over 7 and 6%, respectively, in the last 24 hours and 13 and 177%, respectively, in the last week. These upward rallies are anticipated to continue and intensify further in the upcoming weeks and months. Please let us know what you think of Lyn Alden's $1 million Bitcoin prediction and her assessment of the US and global economies as they stand right now. Thanks for watching.